So we are ready to start. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Wales. Wales is here.
I'm here, yes.
Wonderful. Good morning, Helena.
Can I share my screen?
Yeah, good morning.
Just a second, Wales. I will. You are co-host now, Wales.
All right.
Good morning, Wales, Helena, Elena, and Eva for the Carpatho-Rusyn attitude at home and in diaspora. We'll start with Wales without wasting any other time. To you, the microphone, Wales.
Very good. Good morning to everyone. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations in 1948, guarantees rights to education and participation in cultural life. It says everyone has the right to education. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial or religious groups. And everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts and to share in scientific advancement and its benefits. So, modern education and cultural life presuppose language standardization. In Albania, as I understand it, the two dialect groups, Geg and Tosk, differ. Still, Geg speakers in northern Albania and neighboring Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Kosovo have successfully learned to use the Tosk-based standard form codified in the 1960s and 1970s instead of a previously existing Geg standard. But diaspora groups further away perhaps could not so easily acquire standard Albanian. The Slavic language group provides instructive parallels to this situation. First, the Burgenland Croatians in Eastern Austria came about 500 years ago from a region in the Balkans straddling different dialect boundaries. And I have a map to show how they moved from the northwest corner of Bosnia to what was then Western Hungary, but since World War I has been the Austrian province of Burgenland. So here's the map. Here's the map. At the time that they left, their place of, here's the map. Their place of origin was in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So they were moving from one place to another within the same country. However, they moved quite far, 400 or 500 kilometers, to a place where they were surrounded by speakers of German, Hungarian, and Slovak. So we can call them a diaspora. When they left, this corner of Bosnia was the meeting place of three dialect areas of Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, namely the Kaj dialect in northwest Croatia, the Cha dialect to the west and southwest, including the coast and the islands, and hey, you have to admit someone, and the Sto dialect further inland. And in fact, the present-day Burgenland Croatians speak Kaj in some villages, Sto in some villages, but mostly Cha. But all of them understand one another. It is interesting to note that they brought the name Hrvat, meaning Croatian, with them up to Western Hungary and Eastern Austria. Back in the 1500s, some, but not all, of the ancestors of the present-day Croatians used that name for themselves. After they left, two things happened back in the homeland. First, the Ottoman or Turkish Empire conquered more and more of the Central Balkans, so that inhabitants of the Central Balkans moved west and north to get away from the Ottomans. This meant that the Shto dialect expanded into present-day Croatia, while Kai and Cha lost territory. You can see in my diagram, Cha down here, Kai up here, Shto, and then the Ottomans come and they push the Shto dialect speakers further and further. The situation is like the 20th century American novel by Thomas Wolfe. You can't go home again. If the Burgenlanders went to visit their ancestral villages now, they would find only the Shto dialect there. Second, the Shto dialect now covered all the territory of present-day Serbia and Bosnia, and a large part of the present-day territory of Croatia. Therefore, Shto became the basis for the standard languages of all these areas. Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, accepted a Shto-based standard in the 1800s, even though it is located on Kai dialect territory. But the future Burgenland Croatians had already left and could not take part, had no voice in forming the standard language or languages of Croatia. The Burgenlanders have cultivated a written standard language in the last few centuries, most intensively in the 1900s. They have institutions that watch over the standard and publish books. They have newspapers and magazines. They have radio and television programs on Austrian media. They have some schools that teach in Burgenland Croatian. They have some folklore ensembles that present songs and plays in their language. However, young people are more and more shifting to German. In most of the 1900s, the Burgenland Croatians felt cut off, separated from the Croatians in Yugoslavia. One reason for this feeling was the successive governments of Yugoslavia. Between World War I and World War II, and now I'm going to stop for a moment and ask, are you seeing my video? Because if not, I have to change something. Okay, let's try to get the video. Now can you see me?
No, we continue to see the piece of paper, the text that you have from the document.
Very good. That's the most important. But perhaps you can see me in a small corner
Oh yes,
of the screen.
you we can see. Yes.
Okay, good. So between World War I and World War II, Yugoslavia was ruled by the Serbian king. And the Burgenlanders did not see his policies or his government's use of the term Serbo-Croatian language as favorable to Croatians. After World War II, the Communist Party government again de-emphasized the distinction between Serbs and Croatians, and again pushed the notion of a Serbo-Croatian language. Furthermore, the party repressed religion, although not as violently as communist authorities in some other countries. This was still unattractive to Burgenland Croatians, who are strong churchgoers, heavily Roman Catholic by religion, and are thus similar to their Hungarian and Austrian neighbors. As we know, Croatia gained its independence in the years 1990 to 1995, and gave the Catholic Church a leading position in society. This encouraged contacts between Burgenland and Croatia, and Burgenlanders were more in touch than before with the language used in Croatia. Would it be reasonable for them to give up their own written standard language and accept the standard Croatian as used in Zagreb? In fact, Burgenlanders could not easily shift to standard Croatian because of striking semantic differences in the vocabulary. The same word means different things. Godina in Burgenland, that's rain. In standard Croatian, that's year. Stvar in Burgenland, that's animal. In standard Croatian, that's thing. And here are some more examples. Burgenland standard, they say cha. In Croatia, što, for what? Burgenland jur, standard in Croatia, već, already. Burgenland već, standard in Croatia, više, for more. Burgenland ljeto, standard in Croatia, godina, for year. Croatians do say ljeto, but that means summer. Godina, or kisha, for rain. Stvar in Croatia, životinja, for animal. Dugovanje, this is surprising. Dugovanje for stvar, which means thing. And a few more that you see here. There are also differences in word order. Standard Zagreb Croatian prefers to put an auxiliary verb in between an adjective and a noun, and it says, Dobri su studenti ovdje. Good are students here. Whereas Burgenland would say it just as in English or German. Dobri studenti su ovdje. Good students are here. Imagine the task of teaching a generation of Burgenland Croatian children that they have to move their auxiliary verbs in their sentences and that they shouldn't say dugovanje to mean thing, because everybody in Zagreb will think that they mean money that somebody has to pay to someone else. The children will most probably react by saying, Croatian is too difficult. Well, I'll just speak German from now on. That is, language purism can lead to a decline in the use of a minority language. Fortunately, the authorities in Croatia, also the authorities in Austria, have not tried to impose Zagreb Standard Croatian on the Burgenlanders. The ideology is rather, see how rich Croatian is. It has 3 dialects and it also includes these Austrian varieties. Both before and after Yugoslavia broke down and Croatia left, scholars in Croatia have helped to publish dictionaries recognizing Burgenland Croatian as separate from the Zagreb Standard. Number 2, the Carpatho-Rusyn.
Wales, you have 6 more minutes.
6 more minutes.
Thank you.
Okay. Inhabiting areas in southern Poland, eastern Slovakia, and adjacent parts of Ukraine are the westernmost parts of the East Slavic dialect continuum, and they haven't always agreed among themselves about which national group they should belong to. Russians, Ukrainians, a separate nationality, and this has also meant that they could not agree on which language their speech was a part of. Church Slavonic, is Russian their standard language, their Dachsprache? Should Ukrainian be their standard? And they would speak dialects of Ukrainian? Now, Russians have expressed their opinions, and Ukrainian scholars have tended to place them among the Ukrainian dialects, but all without hearing the voice of the Rusyns themselves. Now, up there where the Rusyns live, modern-day efforts to standardize it really started around 1990, and they've gone furthest in Slovakia, less in Poland, and least in Ukraine. There is high mutual intelligibility and some sense of unity, but Rusyns from one of those countries could not easily learn to use a standard from another. Now, they mostly all belong to the Greek Catholic, Eastern Rite, Byzantine Catholic Church, also some to Orthodox churches. You'll hear more about these from other members of the panel. Now, in northern Serbia, that is Vojvodina, and nearby Croatia, there is a diaspora group whose ancestors came down from Eastern Slovakia around 1750. They identify as Rusyns, and one of the markers of their identity is belonging to the Greek Catholic Church. But their language shows sharp differences from Carpatho-Rusyn, even from the Prešov area Rusyn standard of Eastern Slovakia. And here's a map showing how they moved south. They weren't running away. They were offered incentives to move, offered land. They could keep their church. Let's get that. Tax breaks, land to farm. Okay. See if I can move this properly. Yeah, the Vojvodina-Rusyns have had a standardized language for more than a century. A Greek Catholic priest, Tavril Kostelnik, published a book of poetry in it in 1904, a grammar in 1924, and it was widely accepted in the population. Interestingly, they didn't, and still don't, all agree about their national identity. Some say that they are their own nation, while others feel they are a subpart of the Ukrainians, but they all use the standard language. We said the Burgenland Croatians couldn't go home again. In their ancestral villages, the same dialects are not spoken anymore. It's different with the Vojvodina-Rusyns. If they tried to go home up to Slovakia, they might hear familiar speech, but they wouldn't find Rusyns in their villages anymore. From a linguistic point of view, they came from places on the other side of important isoglasses. It has West Slavic characteristics, not East Slavic like the Carpathian-Rusyns. Do a thought experiment. Could they, the Vojvodina-Rusyns, shift from their existing standard and learn to use Prešov-Rusyn correctly? Only with great difficulty. See, Vojvodina-Rusyn has 5 vowels on my diagram. The Prešov standard has 7 vowels. Alternations of dental consonants in Vojvodina, not like Prešov. 3 of the Prešov high vowels, I, and U, all correspond to Vojvodina I. So a Vojvodinian speaker would have to learn the proper vowel for each word separately. And they'd also have to learn for each word, whether it was accented on the first syllable or the second or the last syllable. While their own Vojvodina words are so much easier to pronounce, always accented on the syllable before the end. We are short of time, so I'll skip concrete examples, but I can send some by email and answer other questions that you may have. Hvala, ďakujem, veľmi dere. Thank you.
Thank you, Wales. Do you think it will be possible to continue with all the 4 talks and then have questions at the end?
Well, we have to try and see.
Okay, now I would like to have at least the members of the panel agree on that before I go ahead. Eva and Helena and Olena, what do you think? Can we? Olena, we cannot hear you.
I think it will be better just this moment discussion.
Okay, then we'll continue this way. So questions for Wales, please.
But I have a question about Bunjevac. The Bunjevac community is also Croatian, but they live in Serbia.
Yes.
What is their position? They also came from the Dalmatian coast, and my question is, what was the reason that they had to move, and what is the position of these Bunjevac? For they are Catholics living in Serbia.
They're Catholics living in Serbia. I have to admit it is not clear why they left home. So they are sort of a diaspora in Vojvodina. Their language is not very different from the local Serbian standard. Some of them claim to have a separate language. Others don't claim that. Vojvodina is very hospitable to people who speak different languages. And so the authorities are willing to recognize the Bunjevac people if the Bunjevac people want that. but the situation has not settled yet. There are some school textbooks which are, to my eye, only very slightly different from standard Croatian and not very much different from standard Serbian.
It's a historical Hungarian territory, and that's also for Transcarpathia. What is the position of the Hungarian language in these areas?
In Eastern Slovakia, it's a minority language, but really quite a large proportion of people speak it. In Vojvodina, it is the largest of the minority languages, and they have all the facilities that they need: schools, radio, newspapers, television, magazines, cultural organizations. And even a few Serbs have learned Hungarian, although almost all the Hungarians have learned Serbian, so it's not symmetrical.
Okay, I have many more questions, but I'll write to you.
Please do.
Thank you. Other questions? One more question, at least. No?
No?
Okay, well,
All right.
thank you. Thank you, Wales. We'll continue with Helena Duch-Pfeiffer. The influence of emigre Lemkos from different locations on the preservation and growth of the Lemko language.
Good morning, everyone. Because my good morning. Because
you can share now if you like.
Yeah. Because my English is still not really fluent, I will ask my assistant Agata to read my lecture aloud and then to help me with answering the question. Please, Agata.
Okay, good morning. The current text was developed as a result of the research that I conducted in an attempt to determine the correlations between the nature of the diaspora situation and the linguistic vitality of the discussed ethno-linguistic community. The group selected in order to perform observations constituting the basis of my research conclusions are the Lemkos. Characteristics of the Lemkos and their language. This group, which is one of the local groups of Carpatho-Rusyns, has inhabited the northern slopes of the Carpathian Mountains. The type of landscape and geographic conditions the Lemkos lived in affected their lifestyle and influenced the mentality and shape of their culture. And this is also vividly reflected in their language. Living in mountain valleys, the Lemkos were occupied mainly with shepherding and farming, and additionally with trades and handicrafts using local resources. The formation of this group's ethnic identity was determined by specific cultural, social, historical conditions, above all, by relatively early formation of a stratum of native intelligentsia and crossing of cultural borders. Already in the mid-19th century, questions about the character and status of the Lemko language began to emerge among Lemko intellectuals. Basic assumptions of cultural emancipation on the basis of linguistic distinctiveness guided Lemko elites throughout the interwar period. At the time of the peak flourishing of Lemko cultural social potential in opposition not only to the politically and institutionally dominant Polishness, but also to the Ukrainian ideological appropriation of the Lemko area. Lemko leaders propagated the idea that due to their ethnic distinctiveness, the Lemkos possessed both their own language and their own territory, Lemkovina. The other part sought to remain Greek Catholic, but to separate themselves from the eparchy of Przemysl, which succeeded. In 1934, 9 deaneries became directly administered by the Vatican as part of the apostolic administration for the Greek Catholics of Lemkovina. The awareness of the cultural and mental distinctiveness of the Lemkos grew. With such a symbolic capital, the Lemko population was subjected to political actions, meaning meaning displacement. Lemko diaspora. Ethno and social linguistic assumptions, which define the type of conceptualization used in this article, led me to distinguish 4 diaspora areas where the Lemko community lives after 1947. In terms of research, I will refer only to the last 2 in the classification here, however, mentioning all 4 in the situational outline. The first of them is the area in the first area in the diaspora includes the German territories annexed by Poland, where Lemkos were sent during the Operation Vistula in 1947, after part of their population was deported to Soviet Ukraine, approximately 30% of the pre-war population. In the Lemko language, this area was known as Chuzina, that means foreign land, or Zachid, the West. Although it has become familiar in everyday life, it's still symbolically marked as an undesirable land, in which Lemkos yearn for Lemkovina. The second area can be considered as a unique type of diaspora. This is the ancestral Lemko land, Lemkovina, whose cultural character was completely changed after its residents were deported between 1945 and 1947 and replaced with new settlers. The Lemkos who returned after 1956 were scattered and constituted a small percentage of the local population. These parameters, the dispersion and domination of other cultures on the inhabited territory, convinced me to also count the Lemkos living in the historic Lemkovina as a diaspora group. Nevertheless, from multiple points of view, including the symbolical, commemorative idea and landscape, this is a diaspora distinct from the others and has a great influence on the process of Lemko identity formation, preservation of, and care for the Lemko language. Characteristics of the research. The idea of conducting studies on the differences in terms of linguistic attitudes and usage of the Lemko language in relation to one's residents originated as a result of observations of participants and Lemko community events. These events happened both in Lemkovina, meetings at the Ruska Bursa in Gorlice, at the Lemko Artistic Autumn, and the biennial Rusyn Lemko cultural festivals, and the West, the Lemko Vatra in Michałów, meetings at the Lemko associations, and at concerts of Lemko bands. I have also observed gatherings of family and friends. In this article, I use official census data of Lemkos on the language used in all regions. Okay. This text is a pilot presentation of possible broader sociolinguistics research, which would also take into account other areas of the Lemko diaspora. Here, I will compare only 2 diaspora areas located in Poland. They have the same political and legal conditions, the same dominant language, the same educational system, etc. The main differentiating factor will be the area of habitation and its relationship with the traditional Lemko reality, shaping the linguistic image of the world and linguistic structures specific to the Lemko language. Statistical data. As part of Operation Vistula, around 32,000 Lemkos were resettled to the former German territories in Poland. They were scattered and subject to measures promoting assimilation. Throughout the entire period of communist rule, there were no census questions on ethnic identity because communist leadership promoted the idea of a mono-ethnic Poland Republic. Because Lemkos were not a recognized minority at that time, they were officially listed as part of the Ukrainian minority. It was only after 1989 that Lemkos began to be listed as a distinct ethnic minority. Statistical estimates were used since the first census, including nationality declarations, was not carried until 2002. According to these estimates, there should be 50 to 60,000 Lemkos in Poland. It was also estimated that after 1956, about 7 to 10% of inhabitants displaced in 1947 returned to Lemkowina. It can therefore be assumed that no more than 5,000 people returned and 50,000 remained in the West. The 2002 census verified these estimates. It turns out that only 5,864 inhabitants of Poland identified themselves as Lemkos, including 4,039 in Western Poland, only 10% of the estimated population, and 1,621 in Lemkowina, around 30% of the estimates there. This means that the process of assimilation or fear of revealing one's identity, which affected about 90% of Lemkos, advanced further in Western Poland than in Lemkowina. The proportions of those using Lemko at home were similar. 5,627 Polish residents declared that they used Lemko at home, including 3,687 residents of Western Poland and 1,122 residents of Lemkowina. A disturbing trend can be noted here. 352 people in Western Poland declared a Lemko identity, but did not use Lemko at home. In Lemkowina, 301 people did not declare themselves Lemko, spoke Lemko at home. In the following 2011 census in Poland, 10,531 people declared themselves as Lemkos, including 7,450 people from Western Poland and 2,544 people from Lemkowina. As one can see, the proportions shifted in favor of the West. In 2002, the ratio was 1 to 1.8. In 2011, 1 to 2.9. The declarations of Lemko identity increased at least twofold, but a similar effect was not observed with regard to the Lemko language. In the 2011 census, only 6,279 people declared Lemko as the language spoken at home, an increase of only 600 people from 2002. The 2011 census does not list the languages used in each individual voivodeship. I assume that most of those declaring a Lemko identity, but not using Lemko at home, come from Western Poland. The data below will indirectly confirm this assumption. Exercising linguistic rights. The Lemko language was recognized as one of the 15 minority languages in Poland, pursuant to the National and Ethnic Minorities and Regional Languages Act of the 6th of January 2005. Therefore, it's protected and can benefit from the linguistic rights listed in this law and those in the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages ratified by Poland in 2008. One of the fundamental language rights is the right to learn a minority's native language in schools. It takes place if at least 7 parents in a school request it. If there are at least 3, but fewer than 7 parents who request native language instruction, inter-school cooperatives are organized. Instruction in Lemko in schools already began in 1991. Significantly, the first schools teaching in Lemko were in Lemkowina. After several years, instruction in Lemko also spread to schools in the West. Today, Lemko is an elective subject taught as the native language of the Lemko minority for 3 hours a week. According to official data from the Ministry of Education, 303 students were taught Lemko in the 2020 to 2021 school year. 193 17 schools in Lemkowina and 110 in 19 schools in Western Poland. The schools included 4 preschools, 2 with 15 students in Lemkowina and 2 with 20 students in the West. 13 primary schools with 167 students in Lemkowina and 17 primary schools with 89 students in the West. 1 comprehensive secondary school with 8 students in Lemkowina and 1 technical school with 3 students in Lemkowina. Since 2014, Lemko students gained the right to take their Matura exams in Lemko. At present, 10 students have taken the Matura in Lemko, 6 from the West and 4 from Lemkowina. Between 2001 and 2017, there was a Lemko degree program at the Pedagogical University in Krakow. This program sought to develop teachers and other specialists in Lemko language. 14 students came from the Lemko community, including 11 from Lemkowina and 3 from Western Poland. Lemkos in 9 different places in Lemkowina, in accordance with their linguistic rights, secured signs with the name of their town in Lemko. Linguistic practices. In terms of language practices, the disappearance of the Lemko language in intergenerational transmission is clearly visible. This determines its classification and as endangered or highly endangered, based on the results of the participatory observation. I note the rapid rate of disappearance of the spontaneous use of Lemko in direct social conversations during various types of family and public meetings. If 20 years ago, a grandmother speaking to her grandson in Polish felt confused by the situation in my presence, now it is surprising and a sense of a large deviation from the norm to speak to the grandson in Lemko. I witnessed a situation where a grandmother asked her sister suspiciously, "Do you speak Lemko to your grandchildren?" In particular, 2 levels of contact have undergone significant communicative polonization. Intergenerational contacts, grandparents, parents towards children, grandchildren under 30 years of age, and peer contacts among young people and children. In this respect, I also observe the greatest differences between language behavior among Lemkos in Lemkowina and in the West. If there is no difference between these environments in terms of declared linguistic attitudes, the language is considered an important identity distinguishing feature, value, and one of the main components of the well-being of Lemkos. Then in behavior, mainly in the West, there is a clearly discrepancy in relation to the declaration. Young people from the Lemko ensemble Właściwoczka speak Polish among themselves, even though they know the Lemko language. They communicate with me and people from Lemkowina in this language. In the last few years at the Lemko Vatra abroad, I have not observed, with one exception, grandparents or parents talking to children in Lemko, unless they were families who came from Lemkowina. In Lemkowina, among socially active youth, the language of communication is usually Lemko. Parents and grandparents also talk to their children, grandchildren in Lemko quite often, although there are also more and more gaps in this practice. Children who speak Lemko with each other automatically switch to Polish if there is even one person who speaks Polish among them. Similarly, at family gatherings, Lemko is exclusively used only when the entire family is Lemko. Conversely, if one of their members that does not speak Lemko, Polish begins to dominate. The situation with written Lemko is even worse. In this context, it is important to consider the new speakers of Lemko. The appearance of new users and revitalizers of Lemko is an effect of the opening of Lemko faculties where one can become highly proficient in Lemko and involve oneself in revitalization actions. Conclusions. The intention of this analysis to show the greater destruction of Lemko language at the level of the use of its native forms by users in the West in relation to users in Lemkovina requires a separate study. Therefore, the conclusions will be based only on the data provided and the indicated differences in the functioning and condition of the Lemko language in both diaspora environments. The census data indicates that the planned acculturation assimilation of Lemkos is definitely more advanced among the displaced persons who did not return to Lemkovina. In addition, it can be concluded that the basis of the cultural distinctiveness, the indigenous language, is subject to assimilation to the highest degree, and this mainly in the foreign land, while the ideological declaration of being Lemko may even increase in the same community in favorable socio-legal conditions. Lemkos who have returned to Lemkovina tend to be much more active in exercising their language rights, and the language practices also show greater vitality of the native language among returned deportees and their descendants. The results and conclusions above are consistent with many indicators related not only to linguistic vitality, but also those of diaspora and uprooting. Rauch Sulima believes that people without a homeland or uprooted people are masses vulnerable to ideologies, a soil on which various totalitarianisms take root so easily. They lack ethos. Hence,
you would have to finish now. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I understand.
Hence, the number of national declarations in the West could increase between the two censuses.
Thank you. Thank you, and I'm sorry there will be no time for questions.
Sorry, because Agata read not.
No problem. I mean, if we have a minute at the end, we will continue with the questions. Okay. For now, the floor to Elena Budowskaya. The title is Our Language is Trashed Up, Mythology about the Carpatho-Rusyn idiom in Europe and in the US, its origin and contemporary status. Elena, do you have to share something?
I don't have a presentation, but I can show my screen as well as did.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you want to see the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
That would be great. I gave you co-host permission. Perfect.
So here it is. Let me just move. All right. So during my field work in the Transcarpathian region of Ukraine since the 1980s, most encounters with native speakers started with an explanation repeated almost verbatim from person to person. Our way of speaking is a very badly twisted Ukrainian. We have so many Hungarian, Polish, German, and Romanian words. Our speech is so trashed up. Наша мова засмічена, мова, не язик. The two assumptions underlying this statement are that first, vocabulary is the main element of a language, and that an idiom whose vocabulary has multiple loan words is not a proper idiom. It is a bad, trashed up dialect or of some other language, which, and this other language apparently is pure and containing less loan words. Transcarpathian dialects are so different from literary Ukrainian that many scholars, myself included, prefer to consider them dialects not of Ukrainian, but of Carpatho-Rusyn, a minority East Slavic language. Carpatho-Rusyn or Rusyn has been codified and acknowledged as a minority language in Slovakia, Hungary, and Poland after the fall of communism. However, Ukraine has been opposed to acknowledging Carpatho-Rusyn, preferring to consider it a dialect of Ukrainian. It would be understandable that speakers of Rusyn dialects in Ukraine would call their idiom a dialect. That was what they were taught at school, and they didn't know any better. However, in Slovakia, where I also conducted fieldwork starting in 2015, Rusyn speakers also referred to the language using the same metaphor. Our speech is trashed up. Conversely, in an interview I recorded in the diaspora, a son of Russian immigrants born in the 1920s in the US knew about the wealth of foreign words in his parents' language, but referred to it as a source of pride. The linguistic mythology trashed up language also was not to be found in pre-World War II Russian books and periodicals. Apparently, it became widespread as part of language ideology used by the authorities in communist countries to control minority linguistic attitudes. I became interested in its exact origin. Previously, I have researched the mechanism and implications of damage done to the attitudes to the Russian language by the deliberate ruining of Carpatho-Rusyn culture after World War II. In the preceding period, between the wars, Carpatho-Rusyn people in the Carpathian Mountains lived in states that succeeded the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Czechoslovakia, Poland. Turn the page. Now the page wouldn't turn. Now 2 pages turned. Hold on, bear with me. And Hungary. After World War II, the contemporary Transcarpathian region, Zakarpatska Oblast, was annexed by the Soviet Union from Czechoslovakia and became a part of the Soviet Republic of Ukraine. Carpatho-Rusyns of Transcarpathia were declared Ukrainians, and their language dialect of Ukrainian. Additionally, after 1945 in Transcarpathia, a number of changes were implemented by the Soviet administration to incorporate the new population into the Soviet Union and to prevent even the possibility of resistance. The economic basis of Russian traditional life, subsistence agriculture, was eliminated and replaced by mandatory collective farming. That was worse than in Poland or Slovakia. The Greek Catholic Church was liquidated and substituted by the Russian Orthodox Church. The ethnonym Rusin was forbidden. The nascent literary Russian language was banished from public usage and therefore eradicated. Eradicating the spoken language was not possible, since it would mean to forbid 500,000 people to speak Russian in everyday life. However, the Soviet administration did symbolic violence against the spoken language in order to demote its status and to make speakers ashamed of it. One very effective tool for such symbolic violence was the new narrative of trashed up speech. Since this narrative was not to be found between the wars or in diaspora, it would be reasonable to assume that it appeared after World War II as part of the Soviet influence. I found the expression "zasmichena mova" in certain Ukrainian dialectological works of the 1950s and 60s. It was used mostly on 2 occasions. Literal language could be trashed up with either the usage of dialectal words or foreign words. Dialects, as the literature of the time states, are supposed to disappear under the influence of literal language. The point of dialectology is to help teachers recognize and weed out dialectal features from student speech. Interestingly, in the Ukrainian diaspora of the time, the attitude was not present to such extent. Shevelov does not use the word "zasmichena" at all, and his attitude to dialectal and foreign words in the Ukrainian language is placid. The language he writes will take care of itself. Ohienko was mildly against borrowings, as well as against neologism and archaisms in Ukrainian, but mildly. All that corroborated the hypothesis that the trashed speech metaphor was most probably of Soviet origin. Indeed, in the late 1940s and 1950s, having won the war, the Soviet Union was feeling victorious and started consolidating its loyalties to the Stalinist course. As part of it, the former Russian and new Soviet imperialism has again surfaced to a larger extent than before. The vituperative anti-Semitic and nationalistic campaigns against bowing to the West and ruthless cosmopolitans praised the achievements of the great Russian people and, in the typically Soviet equivocal manner, indicated that the destiny of other peoples of the USSR was to be eventual assimilation. Stalin's paper Marxism and Problems of Linguistics, 1950, did not contain the words "Zasarять язык," but it stated that a national language had to be unified, that it was more powerful than dialects, and that the Russian language had conquered many other languages, and continued developing, while the conquered language disappeared. The rest was done by large numbers of Soviet writers and linguists, journalists, writers. For example, Alexander Dymshits, an apparatchik who after the war stayed as a Soviet representative in Berlin, but then was demoted and sent back to Leningrad in 1949, showed his loyalty to the party course by publishing in 1950 in an important Moscow-based journal an article titled "On Some Issues in the Fight for the Purity of Literal Language." Hold on. Yeah. Let me find where I was. In this article, he cracked down on the cosmopolitan attitude to one's language that's trashing it up with unnecessary foreign words, as well as regional words, reflecting federalism, that is, separatist stances in language. Dymshits repeated the word "zasarits" and its derivatives 9 times in a 7-page long article. Every time he referred to a language trashed either by the use of foreign or dialectal words. Dymshits made it clear that using foreign vocabulary in Russian was tantamount to bowing before the West, while using dialectal words was tantamount to weakening the Russian language and Russian nation, seeking alternatives to their rule. In the political climate of the time, both were the worst possible transgressions that could easily get one arrested. These ideas and attitudes that originated in Moscow, the heart of the Soviet Empire, were obligatory for all of the USSR. They were reflected in writings of Ukrainian dialectologists of the time. Apparently, these views also spread to school teachers in Ukraine. On the internet, I found several testimonies of Ukrainians, mostly Western Ukrainians, remembering their teachers' attitude to their dialects in the 1950s and later. They talk about their experience with anger and indignation. I remember the torment I felt at school, and I couldn't understand why I had to say ferma and not khverma, kiny and not konь for horse. My Ukrainian language teacher could not explain that. One should speak literal language, but not folk language, she insisted. I could not understand why was the language I spoke in the family any worse than the official one. Was my grandmother's language not Ukrainian? This offense that I felt as a child remains with me even now. End of quote. Dialectal words were treated as something both harmful and shameful. Another person remembers that in his school in Western Ukraine, there were no teachers from the area. They were all from Eastern Ukraine and some from Russia. When they heard a word in local dialect, some smiled sarcastically and some even started yelling. If that was a general attitude to dialects, the Russian dialects of Transcarpathia would be treated still worse, since they were double offenders, not just dialects, but also full of foreign words, borrowed from Hungarian, Romanian, German, and so on. It would be similar in Slovakia after 1945. The new Soviet school system employed the "our speeches trashed up" narrative. Russian speakers might have adopted this narrative as a way of showing strangers that they are not only aware of the difference between their idiom and the standard one, but that they also have an explanation for it. To sum up, this attitude that, did I say that? I did say it, sorry. In fact, interpreting the presence of foreign loan words as an idiom, as a sign of these idioms' inferiority may go still further back in time. According to a testimony in a Ukrainian newspaper of 1941, a similar discourse disparaging the speakers of the Ukrainian language from using Polish borrowings was used by the Soviet administration in the interwar period, and before that by the Tsarist administration. In essence, this is the purest preservationist stance applied, hold on, let me turn the page, too much, sorry, not to one's own language, but to someone else's. It is also coupled with shaming that other language, portraying it as less than a language, and therefore denying it the right to exist. Denying Ukrainians the status of a language and Ukrainians the status of a nation has been a long-standing tactic of the Russian government, whether Tsarist, Soviet, or post-Soviet. Recently, the internet allows one to see also the popular stance in Russia on this issue. It turned out that a lot, if not the majority of independent Russian bloggers and commentators currently express the same point of view. What is interesting, however, is how the contemporary Russian discourse uses this preservationist stance and the metaphor of language purity for this purpose. Apparently, Polish borrowing, supposedly polluting Ukrainian, are singled out because they are less intelligible for an average Russian speaker. They made Ukrainian less understandable for a Russian, and therefore infuriate those who consider Ukrainian a version of Russian. For such people, Polish words in Ukrainian are foreign words in the Russian dialects. That is, the situation is doubly offensive. This is exactly similar to how foreign words in Russian dialects were seen from the point of view of communist trained Ukrainian school teachers. Nowadays, the official Ukrainian attitude to foreign words in Russian dialects is pronouncedly less toxic. A retired Ukrainian teacher of Transcarpathian teacher of Ukrainian language, how many? 5? Okay. Of Ukrainian language and literature, born locally, explained to me that in the 1960s, when she was at school, teachers and professors used to say that Transcarpathian speech was trashed up with foreign words, while now people call the words in question loan words. Ukrainians, especially young ones, currently seem to be more curious about dialectal speech and less prone to reproach its users. I will probably skip the details of that, but hold on. Oh no, it froze. Okay, so I'll skip the details about the general situation in Ukraine, where there is apparently a linguistic renaissance going on, but this renaissance in attitude to dialects doesn't concern the attitude to the Transcarpathian dialects or the Russian language. They are singled out, gosh, hold on, bear with me. They are singled out because Ukrainians think that if Russians are given language rights, the next step might be their wish to become a separate unity to get the territorial rights, and they definitely don't want that. So they try to walk around the identity of the Russian dialects, and if generally dialects in Ukraine are now welcome, not the Russian dialects, they're trying, people try to explain them away. And let me skip that too. And the stance, our language is not an idiom because it's trashed up, is still to be encountered in writings of Transcarpathian local people, bloggers, writers, journalists. It is clear why Ukraine adamantly refuses to acknowledge even linguistic difference between Transcarpathian dialects and dialects from other parts of Ukraine. Acknowledging the Russian language may be a step in acknowledging the Russian nationality, which in its turn might open a can of worms. While some Russian activists in Transcarpathia state that they do not wish for political but only for language rights, others use Russian ideology as a sign of their dissatisfaction with Ukraine. In this case, they most often express pro-Russian sympathies, whether because the Russian figures of the 19th century traditionally held pan-Slavic or Moscow-file orientation, or because they themselves, the contemporary activists, harbor Soviet nostalgia and look up to the Putin's Russia as the country that will eventually gather back all rebellious Soviet republics and become the new Soviet Union, great and powerful. Of course, there are many people who are nostalgic about the Soviet Union, also in other regions of Ukraine, even in the neighboring Lviv region that is considered to be the bedrock of Ukrainophile attitudes. However, it's only in Transcarpathia that the Soviet nostalgia has surfaced under the innocuous banner of a minority language preservation movement that came into being some 30 years ago. The pro-Russian part of Russian movement is, according to my interlocutors, lavishly supported by Moscow in the hope to use it in the hybrid war against Ukraine. The Soviet nostalgia is skillfully fanned by the Russian propaganda and TV. That makes Russian activists bitter against Ukraine and Ukraine bitter against them. All this seriously damages possibilities for, hold on, my last sentence has disappeared, for future communication and positive steps towards the acknowledgement of the Russian language in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elena. We have time for 1 or 2 questions max. Yes.
Could I ask a question? This Transcarpathia was part of the Hungarian kingdom, and many Hungarians had to leave after the First and the Second World War, and they were replaced by many Russian-speaking people. So there is also a large group of Russian-speaking people, and isn't that also one of the reasons why there is this controversy with the government in Kiev? They want to impose the Ukrainian language as the state language. And the well-known problems in Ukraine are mainly caused by all these ethnic conflicts. My question is, what is the situation with the Russian-speaking minority in Transcarpathia?
To tell the truth, there ain't a Russian-speaking minority in Transcarpathia. The Hungarians are mostly remained in their Hungarian-speaking lands. It is a huge, it is not separate villages. It's a huge piece of land to the south, and some Hungarians were deported, but not many. And the nation, unlike Lemkos, Hungarians were not deported as a nation, so they continue speaking their language. They were not replaced by Russians. Russians and East Ukrainians were imported in the country as teachers and intelligentsia to dilute the Russian population. And second and third generation already spoke Transcarpathian. So basically, there is no Russian-speaking minority in Transcarpathia.
Other questions?
More of a comment. This seems to, the term that you started with, the zasnichena, seems to be part of a broader Soviet phenomenon. The style that they use in criticizing literature, the style that they use in criticizing art. Apparently it's a style that one should adopt if one wants to show oneself to be a proper Soviet.
Absolutely, it was a part. It is interesting how language is always a part of government, state, and all those. This is the metaphor of zasmechena mova, засоренный язык in Russian. It originated in the 50s, with Stalin's article, and it's during the campaigns for strengthening the national unity of the Soviet Union against the cosmopolitans and against the West. It spread everywhere. It was pervasive it was a part of the Soviet language, and it remained part of the post-Soviet language. I just I had a part in my presentation. I didn't have time to read it, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It's pervasive in time and space.
Okay, it's time now to move to the next speaker. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Wales and Chaired, for your questions. Now it's the turn of Eva Michna. The title of the paper is The Functioning of the Lemko Language in the Religious Domain.
Hello?
Eva, shall
yes, I want to share my screen.
Right, I will make you co-host right now. Okay. Could you close your document, Elena? Okay.
I'm sorry. Wow. I have a problem with my sharing my presentation. You see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes, we do.
Yes, okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Eva Michna. Before I start my presentation, I want to thank Helena for inviting me to this panel and organizer for making this event possible at such an uncertain time. It's a great pleasure to be here, unfortunately, virtually. I was looking forward to coming to Tirana,
Yes.
but COVID made this impossible. Luckily, I can share my research with you. My presentation addresses the relationship between ethnicity, religion, and language. It's chiefly a case study focused on functioning of language in the religious domain. This discussion is based on empirical research conducted among clergy of the Greek Catholic and Orthodox Church in Lemko region. Information of the use of the Lemko in the religious spheres in Poland can be found in several publications, which lists the forms of the presence of the Lemko language in both Eastern Rite churches. In my presentation, I go beyond the perspective of an external observer who considers only perceived linguistic facts to show the emancipation of the Lemko language in the religious domain from the emic perspective. In the case of Lemkos, links between ethnicity and religion is very important. Religion and language were the basic cultural features that distinguished Lemkos from their West Slavic neighbors and determined the emergence of the strong sense of separateness. In this early period of formation of group distinctness, the Lemkos were associated with the Orthodox Church, and after the Union of Brest, they become part of Greek Catholic Church. At the beginning of 20th century, some believers returned to the Orthodox Church. Nowadays, they are mainly members of either the Ukrainian Greek Catholic Church and Polish Orthodox Church. Central to our discussion here is nationalization of the Greek Catholic Church, which is connected to a specific language policy. Historically, the language of the worship in the Lemko region was Church Slavonic, but with nationalization, the Greek Catholic Church aimed to replace this with Ukrainian. When the processes of Lemko ethnic revival began in the early 1990s, which also involved a claim for linguistic emancipation, ethnic activists demanded the introduction of the Lemko language into all functional domains. In both Eastern Rite churches where Lemkos gathered, processes of linguistic change began. The use of the Lemko language in the religious domain in Lemkovina should be seen in the context of similar processes in the Greek Catholic Church in the Prešov region of Slovakia. The clergy in the Lemkovina use the church text in the Rusyn vernacular, translated by Franciszek Krajniak, priest of the Greek Catholic Eparchy of Prešov. Now I will speak a few words about the language policy of Greek Catholic Church. According to the principles of liturgical life in the metropolis of Przemyśl and Warsaw, the traditional language of the Greek Catholic Church liturgy is Old Church Slavonic and Ukrainian. But what is the language situation in Greek Catholic Church in Lemkovina? I interviewed 3 Greek Catholic clergy persons working there. The first of my interlocutors was Ukrainian from outside Lemkovina, a graduate of a Ukrainian high school. He declared that he communicates with his parishioners in Ukrainian and uses Ukrainian in the liturgy. At the beginning of our conversation, he stated that he saw no need to learn the language of his parishioners because Lemkos themselves do not know whether they have this language or not. This clergyman's narratives reveals a number of opinions about the Lemko language. He uses mainly colloquial arguments to justify his language choices. We hear them arguments put by the opponents of the emancipation of the Lemkos. He states that the official language of the Greek Catholic Church is Ukrainian. On the other hand, allows the occasional festive appearance of Lemko during some parish services. The next clergyman comes from Lemkowina. He did not openly declare his national identity. He uses Lemko in his contacts with parishioners and teaches religion in Lemko, but preaches in Ukrainian. However, he noted with approval that there was no linguistic change in his parish, that the language of the liturgy remains Church Slavonic. He believes that for Lemkos, changing the Church Slavonic into Ukrainian makes no sense, and emphasized that the official language is the Greek Catholic Church. In Poland, languages in the Greek Catholic Church in Poland are Church Slavonic and Ukrainian. He also talked about the possibility of using Russian translation from Slovakia in the Greek Catholic Church in Lemkowina. According to him, although they require certain corrections, are comprehensible to Lemkos. At the same time, this priest believes that introducing text in Lemko, certain religious services and obtaining the church imprimatur for it requires a lot of work. Yet he believes that it is worth undertaking, so that the word of God reaches the faithful in their mother tongue. Yes, next, the third. My interlocutors, the youngest Greek Catholic clergyman, is a Lemko, who did part of his studies at the seminary in Prešov. He openly declares his Lemko identity. His opinion on the language policy of the Greek Catholic Church suggests criticism. He pointed out that contrary to the documents according to which the official languages in the Greek Catholic Church are Czech Slavonic and Ukrainian, most clergy and hierarchs claim that Ukrainian is the only legitimate language in the Greek Catholic Church. He believes, however, that a change in the language policy and an increase in the presence of the Lemko language in the Greek Catholic Church will be possible if and when the members of the church openly and directly demand the right to receive the word of God in their mother tongue. Analysis of these interviews, yes, next slide, analysis of these interviews with Greek Catholic clergymen allows to verify the dominant picture in the extant literature, which is that in the Greek Catholic Church is displayed only for the Ukrainian language. The narrative shows that much depends on the decision of the individual priest. Contrary to the official church policy, they may decide, for example, to keep Church Slavonic for the liturgy and then choose another language to communicate with his parishioners or for religious instruction. I'm sorry, I have a problem with my voice. Yes. Now the language policy of the Orthodox Church. The liturgical language of the Polish Orthodox Church is Church Slavonic. However, is permitted to use national languages to contact the faithful, to teach religious instruction, and to deliver sermons. The Orthodox Church has formulated a position on East Slavic minority languages, but it does not apply to Lemko. Now, how is situation of the Lemko language in the Orthodox Church in Lemkowina? The material analyzed in this part of the presentation consists of 2 interviews with Orthodox clergy working in Lękowina and 1 conducted with a layperson who is institutionally affiliated with the Orthodox Church. Is the first Orthodox interlocutors is Lemko. This clergyman is also one of 7 priests who completed a course in Lemko language training, which he now teaches at school. In his contacts with parishioners, he uses Lemko. The liturgical language in his parish is Czech Slavonic. He also preaches in Lemko. For a few years, he has been introducing readings in Lemko. He uses Rusyn translations from the Prešov region, but according to him, they are poor. If he uses them, he tries to correct them himself. According to the priest, there is a need for Lemko translation, but he says that the Lemko community lacks adequate professional translators who are also biblical scholars. He doubts whether a small group can undertake such a huge project. He also stressed that each translation has emancipatory meaning important for raising the prestige of the language. The second interviewee is also a Lemko who was born outside Lękowina and graduated from the Ukrainian high school. In his contacts with the faithful, he uses Lemko, although he questioned its status. He believes that despite the codification, Lemko is still diverse and that in every village is spoken differently. Thus, he preaches sermons in the language of the local community. His remarks revealed a highly critical attitude to attempts to introduce Lemko into the Orthodox Church. He's irritated by the notion that if a priest is a Lemko, he should use Rusyn translation from Slovakia. He spent much time during the interview criticizing Slovakian translations, noting that they are not professional and that from the theological point of view, they verge on heresy. This priest argued that introduction colloquial language reduces the mystery. Okay. Next. A third interviewee, an Orthodox layman, is associated with the Orthodox Church. He is one of the main animators for the introduction of the Lemko into the Orthodox Church in Lękowina. He cooperates with the clergy of Prešov region and was the first to use Rusyn translations approved for use in the Greek Catholic Church. He is also a teacher of the Lemko language. He believes that the language in the Rusyn translations from Slovakia, other than pronunciation, differs little from Lemko language. He also reflected on the lack of formal regulations regarding to use the Lemko in the Orthodox Church. He realized that it is used informally and the church hierarchy does not oppose it. His narrative also included reflections on Lemko attachments to the Czech Slavonic language. According to this interviewee, readings during services, which have been introduced in many Orthodox churches in Lękowina, are primarily symbolic. They stem not from the fact that Lemkos not understand Czech Slavonic, but rather from their ambition to make their language sound in their church. Not only to be a symbol of their presence, but also to enable it. What emerges from the analysis of the narratives Orthodox clergy is a picture of how Lemko functions in the Orthodox Church, which allows somewhat greater freedom in the use of the Lemko than the Greek Catholic Church. And conclusions. Yes. Analysis of the collected material confirms findings of an earlier study according to which Lemko is used primarily in the Orthodox Church, while in the Greek Catholic Church, the Ukrainian language dominates. However, this data allows the creation of a more nuanced picture of how Lemko functions in the religious domain. Through analysis of the narratives, we can trace the linguistic change that has been taking place in both churches since the early 1990s, and it has to do with the ethnicization of religion. The Greek Catholic Church, which considers itself the depository of the Ukrainian tradition and history, has developed the linguistic policy of strengthening the presence of the Ukrainian language in the church. It also serves as a barrier to the Lemko language and suppresses the church Slavonic language. At the same time, the research shows that the policy of Ukrainization pursued by the church hierarchy confronts various forms of dissatisfaction on the part of the Lemko congregations and Lemko clergy. The interviews shows that the faithful want to mark their presence symbolically in the Greek Catholic Church through at least the occasional presence of the Lemko language during services, and they express this openly. I think that the democratization of the church is an important factor. The data also confirm that despite the pressures from the church hierarchy, individual priests pursue their own language policy in their parishes and have a certain amount of freedom to do so within the limits set by the institution. Focusing in its language policy on preserving the church Slavonic language, the Orthodox hierarchy does not object to the use of Russian religious texts translated in Slovakia and Greek Catholic Church. However, this is not done on a formal basis, so its sustainability is in question, especially since it has opponents within the Orthodox Church. Paradoxically, the lack of the nationalization of the Orthodox Church, which in Poland gathers all its Slavic minorities, creates a greater chance for the introduction of the Lemko language, not only in communication with the faithful and religious studies, but also during Orthodox Church services. Okay, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Eva. Thank you, everybody, for this interesting session on Lemko in diaspora and the way it is threatened and the strategies for its maintenance in some cases. Now we have 5 more minutes for questions for Eva, and if not for Eva, for others, but we'll start with Eva. Thank you. Yes, Elena.
Eva, I'm not much familiar with Greek Catholic Church and its attitudes, but I'm familiar with the Orthodox Church attitudes. And from your material, I had some picture which is different from yours, and I wonder what you will think about how I see it. In the Orthodox Church in Poland is very minor, and it is heavily helped materially and generally by the great Russian Orthodox Church. So Russian Church has huge influence on the Orthodox Church in Poland, as far as I understand. Maybe I'm wrong. And in the narratives I've seen that you cited, I've seen a couple of standard Russian Orthodox priest narratives. First, the Church Slavonic is the language. Everything else is on the verge of heresy, because even in Russia, there are debates about whether one should introduce the Russian language and substitute Church Slavonic, but the official church considers it as heresy because it is the imperial language. It unites all the Slavic territory, all the Orthodox Slavic territories. It should be Church Slavonic and nothing else. Another familiar Orthodox narrative was that it reduces the mystery, and it is kind of why it is on the verge of heresy. So the mystical part of the Orthodox Church is connected by many, and especially in Orthodox seminaries, in the views of people who are educated in Orthodox seminaries. It is sacred. The Church Slavonic is sacred. If you do away with Church Slavonic, you will do away with it. It is heresy. That's why it's. I don't see Orthodoxy as more liberal to the Lemko language. It has its own agenda. It wouldn't budge for any national language, Russian, Belarusian, or Lemko. It doesn't. It is its attitude as the Catholic Church attitude before Vatican II, I guess.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course, I agree with you. But for me, it's interesting how Lemko clergymen, how my interlocutors speak about Lemko language in the church. I know that they influenced by different, I think, power. It's a myth. It's very interesting that they try find the place for Lemko language in the church. But I agree with you that from theological point of view, this is very, very complicated.
Thank you. Other questions? Well, then we will close here this session in about 2 minutes. You can stay on this Zoom link in about 2 minutes. We will have Salem give brief remarks on the conference, and that will be the last day and the last thing we will do in this conference, and then we'll go to the excursion. I wish we had all of you with us. I know that Wales and Eva and Elena wanted to come and we had plans to come. I'm really sorry that it didn't work out for you guys. And thank you so much for your participation, your work for this conference. It was great to have you. Thank you. We can wait now for Salem. Other people will join us in about 2 minutes, I think, because everybody has been given the link for this last part of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I can hear from the room next to me that one of the sessions, that we have 3 sessions today, one session that is in Albanian in the other room is still continuing. And we have one session on Vlah and Vlah or Aromanian that is taking place in the conference venue, the one that we have had during these last 3 days. That session is also in Albanian and a small part in Aromanian.
If there is time, I could ask still something about the session we had. The Lemko language is Lemko, and it's a matter of terminology. Lemko, is that the same as Carpatho-Rusyn, or is it also a different variety? I was rather confused. And then this acceptance of the so-called dialects being a proper language, that's a very important aspect, and it's very much true for the present-day situation in Ukraine. the reason of all the conflicts is also for a great deal due to the language problem, where the Ukrainian state wants to impose its national language. There should be one language, one culture, one history, and that's impossible in a country which is consisting of many parts which had completely different historical backgrounds. So my question is Lemko the same as Transcarpathian?
My understanding was it is, but who's answering?
I can see Lemko is not naturally in Poland, in Slovak, and in Hungary and Serbia. Russian language have many regional versions, and Lemko is one of the versions of Russian language. It's not dialect; it's a version. But from Ukrainian side, it's a dialect. But in our country, it's a version of Russian language.
Yeah, you call it language,
but
it's the big discussion. Is it a language? Is it a dialect? But is the Lemko language, when you use it in Ukraine, is it a possibility to communicate in a normal way with the people speaking standard Ukrainian?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's normal because we can community with Slovak, with Czech, because Slavic languages is not much different.
But it's not what people call a West Slavic language. It's an East Slavic language. It's one of the East Slavic languages, to which Ukrainian and Russian and Belarus belong to that. But it's a kind of continuum of dialects.
For us, it's not problem communicate, but are the people they speak, we don't understand Ukrainian, and it's in the ment because they have a ideological stop. We don't understand.
Thank you.
Well, in terms of terminology, there are different kinds of Rusin, and Lemko refers specifically to the ones who live in Poland.